Afghanistan now has a Taliban government, and the crackdown on any expression of dissent has begun. The tension was palpable, and so was the fear, reminiscent of the repression and the violence of the past.
I don't want to be controlled. I don't want to cover my face.
This is a different Afghanistan now. A lot of people here are having real trouble accessing cash. Right now they're offering us to go inside the cell. I'm not sure how I feel about this, but I don't know that I have an option. This group of women came out to the streets of Kabul. They want the international community to put pressure on the Taliban. We have seen tensions rise. We have seen Taliban fighters lose control of the situation.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to part 5 of our News Rehab. For those of you who haven't attended so much, the News Rehab is intended to look at how we inform ourselves. So we're really trying to perhaps re-enchant ourselves with accessing news, informing ourselves about the world, and looking at what isn't working right now. We've passed the last few days have looked at misinformation, the economics behind misinformation. We've interviewed people who are really looking deep down into the algorithms that feed us news. We've talked with journalists, with computer scientists. And tonight we're very excited to welcome Anelise, who is going to tell us a bit about her perspective as a reporter. And Anelise, you were supposed to be in Kabul tonight, but you're not.
No, I'm still stuck in Paris.
Right.
There are worse places
Who
in the
are
world.
you?
Sure,
Come
sure.
on.
Well, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. We'd love to ask you a few questions about your habits. Of course, lots of things about what's happening in Afghanistan right now. But before we get into all this, I might have a very, very simple question on simply how, what appealed you to becoming a reporter? How did this begin for you?
That's a very good question. I guess curiosity.
Sure.
I was always very curious, and I always wanted to meet people. But there's also another aspect to that. I've always wanted to, I don't know, I always thought that life was too short and I wanted to live multiple lives if I could. Mm-hmm. And I guess through other people's lives, through the exercise of telling people's stories, which I don't necessarily think that I do. I help people tell their own stories, but through meeting so many people and getting a glimpse of what their most important hopes and most profound fears are, I get to experience a little bit about what it's like to be in their shoes, and that way I get to live their lives for a little bit. So yeah, I think it's a combination of those two things of being very curious and always wanting to know what was happening and to understand things in a more detailed way, but also this, I don't know, childhood and very pure or at least innocent dream of wanting to live more than once.
Yeah.
And how come you went to conflict zone? How come you choose to, yeah.
It's an interesting question as well, because a lot of people that I know, friends of mine, tend to say, well, wherever there's trouble, there is where Anelise will go. Wherever there's, I don't know, conflict and war and destruction. But what attracts me is not the conflict, nor the destruction, nor the death. What attracts me is the resilience, is this sheer power that people tend to display when confronted with an unsurmountable challenge. When people are exposed or confronted with something that is very, very difficult to grasp, that is, most of the time, that is when we reveal our true potential. That is when we do things that surprise even ourselves. And to witness that in other people is exceptional. I feel very, very lucky to be there. Of course, I also witness a lot of pain and a lot of sadness, but honestly, most of the time, what I witness is just this sheer, this crazy amount of strength that people display an incredible amount of courage and strength when confronted with difficult challenges.
And you made a very interesting distinction at the beginning between telling people stories and allowing people to tell their own stories. And I'm curious, how often do you feel like news don't do that? Maybe warp things a certain way, or what are the powers, implicated in shaping those stories?
I feel like, we've been talking about the media recently very often, right? We've been talking about the media as if it's this soulless, godlike institution. I feel like I don't really like talking about that. I like talking about the work of journalists, because in the end, there are individuals that are conducting the work. At that level, journalists are after stories, right? We are after true stories. But I
Not
don't
all
see
of
my
them.
work. Well, yeah, perhaps. But I don't see my work as, again, I don't see my work as telling people stories. I find that the only way to truly make this work is to collaborate with people. Because if people don't want to tell their stories, then for me there is no point in going after them or hunting them down. Or obviously, I'm not talking about people in power that might be hiding something or be responsible for something they don't want to reveal. I'm talking about ordinary people. But I do see the point of your question, and I do feel as though for a number of years we as I'm talking about we as a huge body of journalists, we have been perhaps dissuaded from telling people stories, from working with people in telling their stories, for a number of reasons. Cost reductions and I don't know, perhaps even ambition. I think that certain news organizations did lose track of who they were actually working for. And that is obviously very dangerous. And I think that has helped led us here, led us to the state of affairs that we are in the world, and led certain extreme choices to be made by big countries that are supposed to be a reference of democracy.
How you start your day in terms of habits, as like in terms of routine related with news, what you read, what you don't read, how you inform yourself, because as a journalist, it's for me at least, it's very important what you read, how you try to find the truth, because even if we want to find the truth today, even the people that are really interested in the truth, it's very hard to find it. Like it's foggy everywhere, and then to really go to the reality, to the real story, are so many fake stories that are so real, looks like, and we cannot even understand what is true and what is not true. So I'm interested how you make this filter.
Well, it is a challenging distinction these days, but I think one thing that these modern days have given us is social media. And even though it can be a dangerous tool, it can be used to perhaps fool us. It can also be a very powerful tool to make that distinction and to filter information. You asked me how I start my day. I wish I had a way to start my days. I don't really have a routine. I mean, I haven't been home in almost 2 months. I've been home for the past 3 or 4 days. It's actually very hard for me to even find things in my own home these days because I've been away for so long. But shifting through news, obviously, I feel as though I have a very tall responsibility, because I also help people get informed, right? So not only I need to be able to shift through the noise and the fog, as you say, but I also kind of need to help people, or at least point people in the direction of things that I shifted through and that I know for a fact are truth, or truthful, or the truth. So I tend to have, I don't know, 4 or 5 different screens on all at the same time. And it can be very disturbing for anyone that lives with me to have that experience, because I literally watch, it's like my brothers, when they used to watch football when I was growing up in Brazil, they used to play football in 2 different television screens, in 2 different channels, and on the radio. And that's kind of how I start my day, no matter where I am. I have 2 different phones on in different things. I have a TV in certain news channels that I respect, obviously including Euronews, and I have a multitude of screens on my laptop open with different news that are on. And whenever I'm working on something, I'm obviously going to devote pretty much 90% of my attention to that issue. So some of the other stories I kind of leave aside, because there's only so much I can process. But on a normal day, when I'm not assigned to any specific story, then I am looking through the multiple headlines of that day, and I am basically dissecting every article. And whenever there's a paragraph with a quotation, I go look for that person that is being quoted in that article, to know what that think tank is like, to know what that magazine has written before, to see if there is a trend there. Because what I learned living here in France, and this is my adopted country, and I'm very proud of being a member of French society, is that as long as you know who is telling you the story, it's fine to hear that person or that paper's views. France has a left-wing paper, Libération, that is very, very strong and famous, and a right-wing paper, Le Figaro, that is also a very important newspaper here. And people from the right and the left tend to read both newspapers, because they know those voices, they know whose camps those voices are speaking from. And I feel like choosing your bias, assuming your bias, and being transparent about your vision as a news organization really is the most honest way of going about delivering the news. Because in the end of the day, I mean, we're all people, and we are allowed to have our opinions. Obviously, I'm not talking about individual journalists telling what they think in during their job, but I think as news organizations, if we put forward our values and our opinions, as that institution, I think that is the best way to go about informing people. So yeah, I think I dissect the news articles that I have in front of me. Then I go looking for the information that people that I trust in the business, so other colleagues of mine that I know about that region, for example, much better than I do, because they've worked in the region for multiple decades. I go look for what they're saying, either online, or I basically give them a call and try to figure out if what is being said can be confirmed or not. And obviously, then I have government sources that I can call. I have emails that I send, and I'm very open when I'm checking something, and when I am participating of that process of people that people are also participating of, when something breaks, right? Something new happens, and we are all trying to verify the information. I tend to let people know the process that I'm going through in order to check that information. So I'm very open about telling people that I reached out to so-and-so, that I emailed so-and-so, that I am now on the phone with this person. And then I try to invite people to participate in that process. I think that is the only way forward for news, really, is to be as collaborative as we can possibly be, and invite more people into the conversation. I think shutting people down it really is not the way forward, even though there is so much space for noise and fog. I think the best way is to collaborate, and is to be as transparent as possible.
What do you do when you realize, after you report or something, you realize that was wrong, was fake, or was I don't know, you sort of mislead the information by mistake? What do you do?
Luckily, that has happened I think I can count in the fingers of one hand the amount of times that I realized that I was given the wrong story. And I can give you a very recent example of something that happened to me when I was in Afghanistan. I entered this prison, a prison called Pul-e-Charhi, and it was my own ignorance. I did not know what year that prison was built. And the Taliban man that was the Taliban foot soldier that was showing me around, he was actually the commander of the prison. He said that that had been built by the Americans. And that was not true. And I was posting, I was doing live stories on Instagram, and I conveyed what he had told me without fact checking that. And then I later learned that it was the Soviets that built that. So I immediately fixed it. And I left a note on the stories. I didn't delete the stories. I left a note linked to the stories saying that I had been given the wrong information, and pointing out to articles that have the right information. I think again, the most important thing is to fix things, and mistakes happen. I mean, big outlets like the New York Times, which is a big reference for me. I really like the work that they do globally as in terms of investigations, in terms of multimedia work. They make mistakes as well, either because they're rushing to get a story out, or because a source was wrong. And I think the best way is to correct it, and you don't delete the story you publish. I think the most important thing is that you correct the story, and you make a very visible note saying that that story has been corrected and what was the correction, so that people can trace the information. And if they make mistakes based on your mistake, then it's easy for them to acknowledge that mistake as well.
May I ask, what would you say, or do you think the biggest misconception about Afghanistan is right now from this part of the world?
At this moment.
At this moment, of course.
At this moment, after the alliance left.
Yeah, I guess the misconception is, I guess, is to think that people were only fleeing the Taliban when they went to the airport.
Yeah.
People were fleeing many things. As hard as it is for people to accept that, people were fleeing misery, hopelessness, insecurity, poverty. And just the sheer lack of prospects in the future. And the arrival of the Taliban contributed to many people thinking that was going to get worse. But they were not necessarily all thinking that they were going to be killed by the Taliban, or that the Taliban were going to come after them. And I think that was something that a lot of people, that was a narrative that was conveyed quite often, in the sense of many outlets and colleagues saying, well, nobody would have fled if they trusted the Taliban. And in a way, it's true, because people simply did not trust that the Taliban was the best outcome for Afghanistan. But they were not necessarily fleeing persecution from the Taliban. They were not necessarily thinking that the Taliban was going to come to their homes and get them out and execute them in the streets. They were fleeing many, many things. And it is a devastating sight. It's extremely sad to watch. But I think that was misunderstood and misinterpreted, because there are many layers in this story. Afghanistan is a place that was on the path towards something, but life was not necessarily rosy before the Taliban arrived.
Yeah. And do you think, I mean, this is too close to my heart, and yeah, we spoke before why Afghanistan. And do you think the Talibans from today are the Talibans from the 20 years ago? Do you think they will run the country in that way?
I don't think they are the same, but I don't think that their ideology has changed dramatically. I think they're not the same because Afghanistan is not the same, because nobody there is the same. I think they have mobile phones now, they have access to the internet, they have been exposed to different things. But I don't think that should that should lead us to believe that they have changed in the sense that they are going to rule the country in a more modern way. I don't think that the Taliban is ready to accept, for example, interest rates. And that is something that is crucial for you and anyone to get a loan. And how will the Taliban then accept loans from the international community if interest rates are a sin under Sharia law? How will the Taliban conciliate their idea for the role of women and the space that women can take in society if their interpretation of Islam still says that women don't belong in the same sphere of society as men? I've spoken to Taliban foot soldiers that spoke great English, that had family members here in Europe, that are extremely aware of how the external world works. I have also spoken to Taliban fighters who were coming back from Pakistan after hiding in Pakistan for many years, who had a different view of what should be the role for women in the future of Afghanistan. So it's not a homogeneous group. It's a multitude of players with different interests, and Afghanistan is a very complex country, divided in almost every single way possible along ethnic and tribal and ideological lines. So to say one statement resuming anything about Afghanistan is complicated, and I wouldn't sign on anything like that. Yeah. I think the Taliban could be a different power structure for Afghanistan if they were to deliver on all those promises that we've been hearing since they came to power on August 15th, and since they negotiated with the US in Doha, really, since last year. Those very well-versed spokespeople who are actually very gentle. I met some of them, and they are very polite and in a very ceremonious way. They have a very clear discourse, but it's very hard for them to actually have any control on what the foot soldiers are doing in different parts of the country. It's hard for commanders to have a say on what is happening in isolated parts of Afghanistan. Yeah. So I think we're nowhere near that answer yet. I think we are going to see over the next winter whether the Taliban can actually stay in power, because I am not certain that it can.
Interesting.
I have a bit of a general question. I'm just wondering if you would have any advice for people who, young people, but also older, who have perhaps disconnected with the news and who, for whom maybe it's difficult to relate to a place that's far away. Like, we heard so much about Afghanistan over the last 2 months, but aside from this period, I think, you know, places like this comment on and off the news, and then if it's not in your Instagram feed, you know, okay, I'll go back to watching Netflix. And if I'm not listening to music from there, or I don't watch any movies from there, or I don't have any friends from there, it's very difficult to relate and to get people excited about finding out about the rest of the world. And I'm curious how, I don't know, what how you would advise as a first step, because obviously you have a news reading habit that is very intense, and we can't recommend that to everybody. But maybe there are other things or other ways that maybe with your family or your relatives that you sort of make this bridge between what happens here at home and what happens in a place that in our head is in a very far away map.
I think that's precisely what journalists are supposed to do, right? We're supposed to go where people don't go. We're supposed to see what people don't get to see and report back to them and tell them what's happening, which is why trust is so important. And I feel very lucky when people trust me. I understand the lack of trust. I understand this disconnect between people and journalists in general. I feel like it's partially our fault, as I was saying before, because of the fact that we forgot to get out in the streets and listen to people for a while because of cost reduction and a number of other things. We thought that these news agencies that were doing an incredible job feeding us material from different parts of the world, feeding the same images to everyone and a news log, we thought that that was going to replace our contact with people. And it was going to reduce the costs and therefore was going to allow us to report from more places at the same time. And that was a shot in our foot, really. We should not have done that way. That should never have replaced people going and meeting these stories and feeling the temperature of the place and smelling the pollution and crossing the street alongside a woman that is telling you the story, how much it costs her to go and get water every day so she can cook for her children. Those things are extremely important when reporting a story. I understand that the news cycle can be exhausting as well, because we tend to report on things that are wrong, right? It's very rare that we report on things that are right. And I have a justification for that. If it's going okay, there's nothing to be said about that, right? It's working, so we don't necessarily need to tar ourselves on that. I have colleagues that do a wonderful job celebrating things that are working. I am more interested in reporting on things that are not, because that is for me the most urgent things, and we need to address those things and we need to acknowledge those things. And I feel like part of my mission is to precisely build the bridges that you were saying, to go back to the beginning of my answer, to go to places where people don't go. And I feel like that is, if people lose their interest for Afghanistan, if by now people are no longer hearing about Afghanistan, that is my fault. That is the fault of my colleagues. We're not doing our work right. I think that it's hard, but there are still people there. I am going back, but I have also colleagues that I'm in touch with people there, and we can easily set up a Skype call and conduct this work remotely. We can continue doing this.
Yeah, but you saw already news like even New York Times and other big organizations, CNN, they are not reporting anymore that much from there. We don't have the front page anymore. And as unfortunately Biden said exactly during the big scandal of taking all the soldiers from there, they said people will forget or something like this. So for me it was like so sad to hearing the U.S. president saying this from White House, and yeah, I already noticed that it's not anymore in the news. And how you convince, and yeah, we are getting closer to finish this, and how you convince your editors, your colleagues and boss to let you still do something that you feel that it's super important for our society, for the public?
I think I feel very lucky because at Euronews I have quite a lot of freedom, and the editors trust me.
That's why they are our partner.
Maybe, but we do have a very interesting relationship at Euronews where I get to tell them sometimes that we need to look into a story, and I think part of our work as journalists is to tell our editors what we should be doing. Obviously, we are also told by our editors what we need to look into a lot of the times, but when we go to these places and when we stay in touch with people in these places, we are in a privileged position to tell our editors, I've been receiving these messages, and this is something that we need to look into. Afghanistan should not leave our radars. It's very important that it doesn't. There are people that are only monitoring Afghanistan. I have colleagues who are still there. I have colleagues that are out but constantly monitoring what's happening. And these stories need to be given attention. And I think it's our job as viewers is to continue asking for these news outlets to report on it. And our job as journalists, the journalists that had the opportunity to go, is to continue pushing for that story not to go away. Part of the reason why I'm really trying to go back is because I feel like the story is not over, and the challenges are still there, and the Taliban administration is faced with enormous difficulties right now, and I think obviously the Afghan people are also faced with enormous difficulties. So I think it is very important for the as we say, this homogeneous international community not to forget that this place exists, that these people are still there, and to hold those in power accountable for what they're doing, because they fought for this, right? The Taliban has fought for this. Now they're in charge. So now they're the ones that should be responsible and be responding for what's happening in the country.
Are you not afraid?
I am afraid of many things in life. I think I'm moved by fear. Whenever I'm afraid of something, that's when I go and do that's something. But I'm not afraid of going back to Afghanistan. No, I love the place. I have many friends there. I know that I may be saying certain things that some people won't like, but I think that some of the most intelligent people in Afghanistan will appreciate that what I'm saying is not necessarily shocking for them. I think that they understand that they have a huge responsibility in their hands now.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm sorry to keep you guys waiting. And I'm very, very happy that we managed to make this work.
We're happy.
A pleasure and an honor for me to be part of Unfinished.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. The honor is ours.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, guys.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.